I just, I don't understand. I'm not good enough.
Why don't I love myself
Why
more?
can't I get these things
Just
right?
time and time again, I just fail.
I'm
and I
so
fail.
exhausted. It's really
I have
overwhelming.
nobody
People don't notice me,
on my side.
and I don't make a
I
difference.
don't feel worthy.
I'm just not gonna amount to anything.
I actually have a lot to offer.
People care about me, and they want me around.
I am a good friend.
I'm not alone.
God chooses me
I'm
daily.
compassionate and caring.
I'm a child of God.
Welcome back, Crosspoint students. My name is Sam Crandall, and I have the opportunity of serving as the program director. All month long, we have been in a series called Your New Playlist, where we've been discussing this idea of tapping into what is nearly a superpower, your mindset, and how to choose wisdom when it comes to your thoughts. To kick off our series, we learned that your thoughts determine your direction and read from Colossians 3:2, set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are of earth. Last week, John taught us how to quiet the critic, or that inner voice that causes you to question yourself. From what I understand, y'all have been having some awesome follow-up conversations in your small groups, and I hope this message sets you up well to continue to grow in relationship with one another this semester. Now, let's talk icebreakers. One of my favorite icebreakers, other than you can only eat one food the rest of your life, mine is nachos, obviously, is what is your biggest fear? I love this question because there's so many ways to take it, either irrational phobia or gnarly real life stuff. For me though, my gut reaction to what my biggest fear is birds. That's right. My biggest, even crippling fear is birds. And before you ask, what about X, Y, or Z? Yes, if it's a bird of any type, size, iteration of a bird, I am afraid. For context of how bad this fear is, our neighbors actually just got a pet chicken, and here's how I reacted when the 11-year-old girl tried to bring it near me. Okay, I know it's silly, but I genuinely can't help it. But now it's your turn to help me feel a little more at peace for sharing this with you. So turn to the person next to you and share, what is your biggest fear? Okay, so now that we all shared a fear, I know we can picture what it's like to be afraid of something. Have you ever wondered if there was a way to get over your fears? Maybe to even remove fear from your life entirely? Or what if your nature was leaned more towards bravery versus fearfulness? Can you imagine a life where you were just absolutely fearless? Unfortunately, I don't think fear is something we can fully live without. Sure, our fears evolve and change over time, like when you were little and afraid of the dark or a monster under your bed, to now you might have fears about passing a class or what your future holds. Middle schoolers, your current fears likely look different than the high schoolers in the room. And high schoolers, your fears are probably different than your leaders because things that burden us can change depending on our life stage. So often, though, our tendency is to pretend to be fearless. We try to either act like our fear isn't real, or if we acknowledge that it's real, dismiss it as if it's not that big of a deal. While we might be good at the pretending game, that we're invincible and unfazed, the reality is none of us can actually escape fear. The more we try, the harder it gets to outrun it. Sure, we can ignore it for a while and attempt to push through it, but eventually, fear shows back up. And just like that, it's all you can think about, all you hear, all you feel. It's all encompassing even. Fear has a way of changing the playlist in our minds, doesn't it? When we let fear take over our thoughts, it leads us down a path of endless questions of what if? For instance, what if I don't make friends? Or what if my parents go through with the divorce? What if I fail this test? What if I don't pass this class? What if things don't get better? Fear is tricky though, because sometimes fear can be helpful. Think about it. Fear keeps us from doing reckless or dangerous things, but also those what if questions at times help us avoid things that could hurt us. In your small groups, I want you to discuss the following. What's one example of how fear can actually be helpful? The problem, though, is when we let fear take over, when it becomes the deciding factor of our actions, our thoughts, and our lives, when it holds us back from trying new things or discovering good things. That's when we need to figure out how to turn down the volume on fear. That's when we need a new playlist. You've heard me say it before, but one of the best things about the Bible is that it gives us examples of real people who had real experiences and real feelings, just like us. AKA, the Bible, although written thousands of years ago, is still relatable and pertinent. We can even read about how some of Jesus' closest followers actually had an encounter with him that taught them about how to deal with fear, which I believe we can learn from too and apply to our own situations. While on earth, Jesus spent most of his time with a group of 12 close friends, more commonly referred to as his disciples. Because they spent so much time with Jesus, they had a front row seat to Jesus doing amazing things like healing sick people, forgiving sins, doing miracles, and so many incredible moments that we can read about in the gospel books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You'd think though, since these guys were Jesus' closest friends, they'd have nothing to fear about, right? After all, they were hanging out with the guy who had the power to literally do anything. So what could they have possibly been afraid of with Jesus in their corner? Well, one night they're all traveling in a boat with Jesus when a huge storm rolled in. The waves were so high they were literally sweeping over the boat, water crashing in. In the middle of the storm on a tiny boat, these guys did exactly what I think I would have done. They looked for Jesus, knowing he could stop the storm with just one word if he wanted to. Well, here's what happened in Matthew chapter 8, starting in verse 24. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping, and the disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." Mid-storm, the disciples were terrified, thinking they're going to be shipwrecked, and what was Jesus doing? Taking a nap. So here are the disciples in the middle of the water, riding out this storm, and the one person who could stop it was catching up on some Z's? Surely when they woke Jesus up, they figured he was going to make blue skies appear, quiet the waves, and sail them to safety. But here's what he said instead in verse 26. He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." I think there's one of two ways that we can read into what Jesus is saying to the disciples, you of little faith. The first being, maybe he's angry that they would be afraid of a silly little storm while on the same boat with him, Jesus, the Messiah, like a booming, "You of little faith." The second though, and from what I know about Jesus, I think is a little more likely, is that he wasn't upset with them or annoyed with them that they were afraid, but because he wanted them to be assured that even in the moments of panic, their faith in the one who is bigger than anything they might fear is also stronger, louder, and there to comfort always. Yes, we read in verse 26, Jesus calmed the storm. And not only the literal one raging on the waters, Jesus calmed the storm in his followers. He calmed their fears. And not just by stopping the wind and the waves, but by showing them this. Fear is loud, but it's a liar, because Jesus is bigger than what we're afraid of. Did these disciples have a reason to be afraid? Well, yeah. Again, I'm afraid of birds on a regular basis, so I have no room to judge somebody who would be fearful to be stranded on a boat mid-storm in the middle of the water. But Jesus wanted them to know that their fear didn't have to be the only thing they felt or the only voice they listened to in that water. It didn't have to be the only song on their playlist. His voice and his presence could play louder because remember, fear is loud, but it is a liar. With Jesus, we can turn the volume down on fear. And while we may not be facing a storm at sea, we've all experienced fear. We've all felt afraid, alone, and out of control, just like the disciples in that boat. But in the same way Jesus was with them, he's with us. So we can trust him in the middle of a storm. We can turn to his presence and power when we're afraid. Will we still have reasons to be afraid in life? Absolutely. That's just a part of this whole thing. Because you follow Jesus doesn't mean you'll never fear again. But what it does mean is that he can help you walk through your fear and help you turn the volume down on that fear. Picture a light switch real quickly. You flip it one way and the lights turn on, the other way and the lights turn off. How nice would that be for when we are afraid? A switch that could just make our fear go away. But like I mentioned earlier, fear at times can also keep us alert and safe, so it wouldn't actually be beneficial to have a switch that would turn off our fear forever. Instead, we've got to think of fear like a dial. Because a dial doesn't always turn things off, but it turns things down. When we turn the dial down on fear, we're not shutting it out completely or fully turning it off, but instead we're not giving it the most power or the loudest voice. Of course, difficult things will show up. Yes, scary things will happen. Sure, fear can creep in and hang around a little. We might not be able to turn it off, but when fear starts to loop a narrative in our thoughts, just like a song you can't stand that's stuck on repeat, you can turn the dial down. Now that you have that visual, when you leave students today, I want you to be able to answer the following. What's one step you can take to turn the volume down on fear this week? Again, I would love for each of you to be able to answer what is one step you can take to turn the volume down on fear this week. What's one way to do that, you may be asking? By focusing on what's true. Instead of letting your mind wander into a million what ifs, you can focus on what is. You can focus on the truth we find in Scripture that reminds us of the God who is with us and for us in all aspects, including in the face of every fear. Let's read Psalm 23 together. The Lord is my shepherd, I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. Surely your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. Verse 4 says, even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. Focus on that for a second. When we walk through dark times, we don't have to be afraid because God is with us. He's a shepherd guiding our way. I don't know about you, but if I find myself caught in the wormhole that is my mind filled with fears and concerns of the future, this is a truth I want to remember. God is close beside me and you, students. My challenge to you this week is to memorize this verse, or if you're feeling bold, to memorize this chapter. Let these holy words be the new soundtrack that starts to play when your mind wants to play one of fear. Because again, fear is loud, but it is a liar. Maybe today you need a little help and encouragement talking about or even identifying what it is that you're afraid of. Maybe the volume on your fear playlist is really loud and you need someone to encourage you to trust Jesus in the middle of it. If that's you, you're in the right place. We hope that you will talk with your small group leader, a trusted adult who would love to walk through the circumstances or situations that might be causing you to fear. They're here to remind you that even if your circumstances don't change, you can walk through them with confidence and faith because Jesus is in control of it all. Well, students, your student pastors are going to make their way back up to the stage to pray and dismiss you all to small groups. I hope that you guys have a fabulous time diving into this message, and we hope to see you back here next week for our final week of Your New Playlist.